Mark 7:14-15 is only 2 verses long, yet it dismantles centuries of tradition and rewrites the definition of holiness. Why were Jesus' words so explosive? Let's explore together. This is part 46 of the series. Look at Mark chapter 7, verse 14, from the English Standard Version of the Bible. And he called the people to him again and said to them, "Hear me, all of you, and understand." Mark tells us that Jesus initiated an audience change. He had been talking to the Pharisees and some scribes from Jerusalem about his disciples not practicing the ritual washings that were part of the traditions of the elders. Now, Jesus addresses the broader crowd, who are not religious experts, but regular people. What did he say to them? Hear me, all of you, and understand. To get grammatical for a moment, Jesus has issued 2 imperative commands. First, hear me, and second, understand. The Greek command translated understand literally means set into motion together, or put the pieces together. This isn't just about comprehending the words he speaks. It's about having those words change how you live. Jesus is telling the crowd to hear what he's about to say, and then integrate that information into their practices. Why does that matter? Hearing without understanding and applying the lesson is of little to no value. Let's look at what Jesus wanted them to hear and understand in verse 15. There is nothing outside a person that by going into him can defile him, but the things that come out of a person are what defile him. What is the issue at hand? Defilement. This is not the same thing as being dirty. This term refers to being ritually or religiously impure or tainted. So the subject of Jesus' teaching here is about what creates separation between a person and God, according to the Torah. The Pharisees and scribes are terribly concerned that by failing to practice the ritual washings prescribed in the traditions of the elders, people may accidentally defile themselves by ingesting some unclean particle. What does Jesus say about it? First, there is nothing outside a person that by going into him can defile him. In other words, it's not the unseen particles you picked up along the way, that you unknowingly ingested with your lunch, that defile you and create a separation from God. Rather, or instead, the things that come out of a person are what defile him. What does he mean? Genuine defilement doesn't originate outside a person, but inside. The things that separate people from God are the things that begin in their hearts, minds, and spirits. Think about it. What is more defiling? Having a greedy or lustful or hateful heart, or failing to wash properly, according to the tradition of the elders, before eating your supper? Which is the genuine problem? Jesus says, defilement doesn't come from what enters your mouth, but from what originates in your heart. Before we wrap up, a word about verse 16. Depending on the Bible translation you are reading, you may or may not have a verse 16. Why is that? Because what we call verse 16 doesn't appear in the oldest manuscripts on which we base translations into modern languages. Verse 16 first appears in the late 4th or early 5th century, and doesn't become widespread until the 6th through 9th centuries. In other words, what we call verse 16 is surely not written by the author of Mark's Gospel, and was added by a presumably well-intentioned person to add emphasis to Jesus' words. Let's look at what was added. If anyone has ears to hear, let him hear. The concept is consistent with Mark's account of Jesus' message, and even makes sense with what Jesus said in verse 14. Hear me and understand. But the historical evidence is overwhelming. Verse 16 was added over 350 years after Mark's Gospel was written. So what is the lesson for us from the 2 verses we've just examined? All of us have traditions and practices, and it's easy to think that if we are consistent in following them, we are doing what makes us good people who are right with God. But when those practices are superficial and external, like making sure we never miss a perfunctory prayer before a meal, while we still have dark issues in our hearts and minds, like secret lusts or hatreds, we may have washed our hands and left our hearts defiled. In our next video, the disciples ask Jesus to explain this concept, and he breaks it down magnificently. Thanks for studying with me. Let me know what you think in the comments and share this video with your friends.